Words are a powerful weapon. They can shatter conventional ways of thinking, inspire masses, and they can help break the bonds of tyranny. Words can rally people of all backgrounds and values behind a single cause. And given the right circumstances, words can spark the fire of a revolution. In 1775, when Patrick Henry proclaimed in front of the Second Virginia Convention that I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. His words did indeed spark that fire. But with powerful words often comes great risk. The revolution began with a shot heard round the world fired at the Battle of Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775. As the new year rolled around, the revolution was in full swing and tensions were high between the colonies and King George. Many loyalists were still strongly devoted to the monarchy, and American ties to Britain would not so easily be broken. But on January 10, 1776, independence from Britain was all the colonists could talk about after the pamphlet entitled Common Sense was anonymously published. Now, during this time, close to 2/3 of the colonists were opposed to the idea of forming a new nation. The people had no interest in fighting what seemed like an impossible war with Britain until this pamphlet clearly highlighted the necessity for liberation. Common Sense helped to change the tide of the revolution in favor of American independence. The words within the pages of Common Sense were resolute, and they were not those that were spoken lightly. They were considered treason against a powerful, angry king. The pamphlet was controversial and even addressed the fact in the introduction, saying, perhaps the sentiments contained in the following pages are not yet sufficiently fashionable to procure them general favor. A long habit, not thinking a thing wrong, gives it a superficial appearance of being right. The pamphlet even goes as far as questioning the logic and practicality of the vast new world being governed by a single monarchy. Small islands not capable of protecting themselves are the proper objects for kingdoms to take under their care. But there is something absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. Common Sense is quite often revered as a major turning point in the revolution. Without its powerful words, who knows if the colonists would have ever been enlightened and excited by the idea of independence. The pamphlet proved so influential that John Adams reportedly declared that without the pen of the author of Common Sense, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain. It could be argued that the revolution might have been unsuccessful without the majority of the colonists rallied behind the cause. They united behind words like, it is not in numbers, but in unity that our great strength lies. Common Sense instilled a spirit of rebellion in the colonists and gave the revolution the push and support that it so desperately needed. The pamphlet almost immediately sold out of its 1,000 copies, and people were eager to know who published such treasonous words. History doesn't tell us why it was originally published anonymously, but many speculate that it was out of fear of retaliation from the monarchy. However, a man soon came forward, and as many of you know, this man was Thomas Paine. An Englishman by birth, born January 29, 1737, Paine was just a radical journalist living in Philadelphia at the peak of the Revolution. Thomas Paine was simply a man who argued what was considered wrong in order to prove what he knew to be right. Paine knew the risk of his words: ridicule, imprisonment, death. But still, he wrote them down and published them for all to see. And that has been something that we've seen repeatedly throughout our history. Whether it be for political issues or social injustices, we have seen those who have taken a stand and faced the risks that accompanied their words. In 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "I have a dream." He risked his life, ultimately losing it by advocating for desegregation in a racially charged society. Today, President Donald Trump has repeatedly proven that he is not afraid to wield the power of his words. Not too long ago, President Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border in order to obtain funds to build a border wall. Obviously, these words hold great risk in that they increase the divide between political parties, as well as raise controversy throughout the American population. Those like Martin Luther King Jr. and President Trump have proven the importance of voicing words despite the risks they hold. And that all started with Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine's influence is more notably that his pamphlet Common Sense helped to make the revolution successful by inspiring the colonists. And without a successful revolution, who knows where we might be today. But Paine's influence is also that he set an example by voicing what he knew to be right, despite the personal risks that he faced. The words within the pages of Common Sense questioned, enlightened, and inspired those who read them. In the end, the gain outweighed the risk, and Thomas Paine's words proved to be a truly powerful weapon in one of the most significant battles in history, the battle for American independence.
It is an irrefutable and undeniable truth that the nation we live in today is drastically varied from the one our founding fathers crafted. We live in a state of palpable political and social tension. It's a balancing act as we search for equilibrium between unalike groups of people. Recently, it seems as if we have been more concerned about the divisions that keep us apart instead of the qualities that make us all, unconditionally, American. The key to reunification is simple. We must get back to the basis upon which our country was founded. We must remember what it means to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. On May 29, 1765, the Virginia House of Burgesses was discussing a pressing issue, the Stamp Act. The delegates were angry, and rightfully so, as the British were taxing colonists without any approval or input from colonial legislations. Yet, despite this tyrannical exploitation, many of the colony's representatives were afraid of pressing the matter too far. They defined themselves as Englishmen. But there was a young man in attendance who was able to see past this definition, who was able to see a different picture. Patrick Henry, who at this point had only served in the legislature for a handful of days, stood up and spoke. He introduced resolutions that challenged Britain's governmental overreach and declared the injustice that the colonies were facing. Although today we applaud his bravery and his boldness, many of the delegates at the meeting did not. He was interrupted with screams of treason, but he demanded to be heard, stating that, if this be treason, let us make the most of it. Patrick Henry embodied the American spirit of courage, resilience, and tenacity. He believed that there were some ideals in life that were worth fighting for. He believed in his vision of what America could be, and was uncompromising in his determination to make America into a place where people's rights were protected and liberty was for all. On March 23, 1775, Patrick Henry stood in front of the Second Virginia Convention and gave another of his passionate and persuasive speeches. Many around him wanted to reconcile with the mother country, but he was fearless and resolute. "I know not what course others may take," he said, "but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Patrick Henry was a leading force in the revolution that earned us the freedom we take for granted today. His impact, however, did not end with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. His influence played a heavy hand in the creation of our Bill of Rights, which ensures our individual freedoms. He made a monumental impact on our country. Patrick Henry is but one example. Our history is peppered with heroes who were courageous enough to knock down barriers. What made him truly remarkable was his ability to look past what he could see and to unite the country under the ideals of freedom and justice. We have made tremendous steps towards progress. But these leaps forward only occur when we, as a collective nation, are able to unite and walk a path together. We cannot continue to be a society of subdivisions. Just as the colonists had to escape from who they used to be as Englishmen, we must escape from the categories that we have boxed ourselves into. And like an army of revolutionary soldiers, we must be willing to fight for our nation and for each other. We are one country. We must be united in our commitment to progress, bound together by our hopes and our dreams, our successes and our failures, and one common identity as citizens of the home of the brave. There is an immense power in unity, and all that we must do in order to get back to a place of oneness is to be willing to find our common ground. We are a nation of fighters and believers, of people with courage and determination. We are the city on the hill, the model of liberty and justice. The only way forward is hand in hand with the resolution of Patrick Henry. As President Woodrow Wilson once said, we cannot be separated in interest or divided in purpose. We stand together until the end. Thank you.
There comes a time in every man's life where he's forced to decide who he's going to be going forward and what he's going to value. For some, this moment comes when they get their first job and learn to take on the responsibilities that mark adulthood. For others, it's when they go through a tragedy and discover what true strength means. For a man by the name of Robert Shurtliff, that moment came in 1782 when he decided to take up arms for his country. Joining the 4th Massachusetts Regiment of the Continental Army, Shurtliff was small in comparison to his fellow soldiers, often called Molly due to his inability to grow a beard. But despite his small stature, after a short time in the Army, he was soon given the dangerous responsibility of scouting neutral territory. Shurtliff's job was to assess the buildup of British soldiers and supplies in Manhattan in order to brief General Washington on the Continental Army's attack capabilities. And doing extremely well at this job, he was soon trusted to help lead a raid on 30 infantry men. The fighting was ferocious, and although Shurtliff and his men prevailed, the young soldier only just survived, sustaining a large gash on his forehead. Yet, he promptly turned down medical treatment, tended to the wound on his own, and got back to serving his country. This success springboarded the young soldier's military career, as he was soon given more leadership responsibilities, such as coordinating and leading the capture of 15 British officers. During the siege of Yorktown, Shurtliff dug trenches and participated in the storming of a fort, all with successful outcomes. Yet again, he sustained wounds, being shot in the thigh twice, and again, he refused medical attention. Instead, he extracted the first bullet himself with a penknife and a needle, and, since the other was lodged too deep for him to access, left the second bullet in his leg. For over a year, the small and beardless Robert Shurtliff fought valiantly for the freedoms he believed in, before finally becoming ill due to an epidemic sweeping through the army, and finding himself forced to accept the medical attention he had so strongly opposed. It was during this hospitalization that Shurtliff's greatest secret was discovered. You see, that moment I spoke of, where a man decides who he's going to be going forward, isn't limited to just men. In fact, in Robert Shurtliff's case, it applies very specifically to a woman whose real name was Barbara Sampson, a small but ferocious patriot who had disguised herself as a man and fought under the alias of her deceased brother. The physician who treated her felt sympathy and, after she begged, agreed to keep her secret as long as she continued to allow him to care for her, which she did until the Treaty of Paris ended the war in 1783. But unfortunately, Deborah Sampson's fight did not end when the war did. When the stunned Congressman John Patterson eventually received a note from her doctor, she was given honorable discharge, but no pay. In fact, it wouldn't be until almost 10 years later, in 1792, that Massachusetts would finally grant Deborah compensation, although they still refused to pay her for her many injuries that rendered her handicapped. When angered by the government unwillingness to fund her illegal service of the country, Sampson stated, quote, "I am indeed willing to acknowledge what I have done, an error in presumption. I will call it an error in presumption because I swerve from the accustomed flowery path of female delicacy to walk upon the heroic precipice of feminine perdition," end quote. After years of doing speaking tours as a Revolutionary War vet and working with newspapers and esteemed individuals such as Paul Revere, although less than she asked for, Sampson was granted $76.80 of annual compensation. If I had to guess, Deborah Sampson didn't regret her time spent in the military, despite her many injuries, countless sacrifices, and years without pay. You see, in reading her story, it's obvious to me that she understood intrinsically just how valuable freedom is and believed wholeheartedly in the words of the Declaration of Independence when it says, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights," end quote. Though she was not expected to lay her life on the line for her country and was in fact discouraged from doing so, she was still willing to go above and beyond to protect those rights, to fight for that equality, and demonstrate that that unique American spirit could not be stifled. Whether that path included faking her identity to serve in her country's military or not was irrelevant to Sampson. She would serve and she would fight. Not to get an award or even to get paid, but because she, like so many other Revolutionary War soldiers, believed in something. In today's ever-changing and increasingly distracting modern world, it's stories like this that remind us of the sacrifice of those that came before us and the vigilance that we must all guard our freedoms with going forward. For if we are not willing to put ourselves on the line, eventually, however long it takes, those liberties will be taken. Barbara Sampson was willing to put her life on the line even when the exact opposite was expected. She cared so much about the future of this country that she was willing to dig bullets out of her thighs just so that she could keep on fighting. May that same American spirit stay ever present here in the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you all for attending the 2019 National Society SAR Joseph S. Rumbaugh Historical Oration Contest. Will you please stand for our benediction? Almighty God, we close this evening and this event asking your blessing upon this great nation about which we in this room care so much. We ask your blessing on the youth of this great nation, and especially tonight on these youth represented here. We ask your blessing on the teachers who will teach them in high school and college, and even those who prepare others through elementary school and junior high. We ask your blessing on National Society Sons of the American Revolution, National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution, and the National Society of Children of the American Revolution. Bless us for this evening, for a night's rest, and for the events of tomorrow. Amen. Good evening.